Jim Morrison was 27 years old when he was found dead in a Paris bathtub. A rock god, a poet, a drunk, a visionary, a self-destructive mess. He was all of these things at once. The lead singer of The Doors didn't just sing, he conjured spells on stage, seduced crowds into chaos, and lived like a man who knew his time was short. By the time he died in 1971, Morrison had already burned through fame, fortune, and his own body with a reckless abandon that bordered on suicidal. He was a walking contradiction, a shy introvert who commanded thousands with his voice, a scholar who played the drunken fool, a romantic who treated lovers like disposable muses. We all know the legend, the leather pants, the arrests, the infamous Miami incident. But who was the real Jim Morrison? The answer isn't simple. To understand him, we have to separate the myth from the man, the poet from the addict, the genius from the train wreck. This is the unfiltered story of Jim Morrison, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jim Morrison wasn't born a rock star. He was born James Douglas Morrison on December 8, 1943, in Melbourne, Florida, the eldest son of Clara and George Morrison, a stern U.S. Navy officer. The Morrison household was one of strict discipline, where disobedience was met with swift punishment. Jim's father, a man hardened by war, expected order and respect. But even as a child, Jim refused to conform. In his younger years, his family called him Jimmy, a name he answered to all his life to those who knew him. At 13, Jim's favorite writer was Norman Mailer, and he could roll out entire Mad magazine parodies from memory. Yet his school records indicate his teachers' frustrations at Jim's hyperactivity, and in some classes, he was forced to sit alone so he wouldn't bother the other students or disrupt the class with his loud interjections and joke accents. In his late teens, the mischief escalated. On the way to an FSU football game on September 29, 1963, Jimmy and his friends were raising hell in Tallahassee. Some cop cars pulled up. Jimmy stole an umbrella from a police cruiser. They arrested him, charged him with larceny, a cop's helmet had also vanished in the melee, being drunk and disorderly, and resisting arrest. At the station, the cops pushed and slapped him when he compulsively mouthed off, photographed him looking like the bleary, disheveled 19-year-old punk that he was. The next day, knowing he was in trouble, Jimmy asked for help from the professor for whom he'd written a brilliant paper. The teacher got him cleaned up and vouched for him in court, and Jimmy was let off with a $50 fine. The university, mindful of his good grades, only put him on disciplinary probation. Some would say this was a foreshadowing of his notorious rebellion against authority later with the Doors. According to Stephen Davis's book, Jim Morrison, Life, Death, Legend, Morrison's early romantic life was just as turbulent. His first serious girlfriend was Tandy Martin. She was a year younger than Jimmy and was introduced to him by Jeff Morehouse. Tandy Martin lived in the neighborhood and was pretty and petite, with curly brown hair, and for a while they were inseparable. He told her he wanted to be a writer and loaned her some of his notebooks with the sketches and poems that he worked on. They'd walk to school together. Jimmy told her constantly that he wanted to kiss her toes. At night, he appeared under her bedroom window, tossing coins at the glass to try to wake her up. When she came downstairs, he'd be gone. The next morning, he would deny he'd been there. A lot of his show-off public antics, declaiming poetry, balancing on things, waiting in fountains, embarrassed her. He affected a mock Virginian drawl. "Tanda, I think I'm gonna go over and piss on that fire hydrant," he'd say, as he started to unzip his chinos. Mortified, she would scream at him until he laughed at her. She asked him why he played games with her all the time. He told her, "Nobody would stay interested in me if I was normal." Soon he was bullying Tandy the way he bullied his younger brother. Jim and Tandy would take the bus into Washington together, and he would suddenly ditch her and disappear, leaving her crying and confused until he showed up again, seemingly out of nowhere. When Jimmy was in one of his black moods, he made those around him suffer. And years later, everyone remembered that it was Tandy Martin who bore the brunt of Jimmy Morrison's pain. Once, he told her he had a problem, one that he couldn't talk to his parents about. and she got him to see the youth counselor at Westminster Presbyterian Church, but Jim never told her what they talked about. It didn't end well with Tandy either. On what was unbeknownst to her their last Friday night date, Jimmy got drunk and then started to cry when she called him on his behavior. Sobbing in her lap, he told her that he loved her. "Sure you do," she said with sarcasm. Suddenly, he grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. "You're so smug," Jimmy hissed, and threatened to cut her face so no one else would look at her. Probably something he'd seen in an old noir movie. The next afternoon, Saturday, he called again to apologize and ask if he could see her. She told Jimmy that she had a long-standing date for a formal dance with someone else. There was a long silence. "But I'm moving to Florida tomorrow," he blurted. "Tomorrow I'm gonna be gone. For good." Tandy was stunned. It was the first she'd heard of this. Jimmy arrived at her house a few minutes later in a rage. She later told journalist Jerry Hopkins that Jimmy stood outside under a tree and bawled. "At least I'll be free of you. I'm leaving, and I'll never write you. I won't even think of you." She tried to calm him down, but he was insistent and frantic to get back the notebooks he'd given her to read. Late Sunday night, she woke up and thought Jimmy was standing under her window. When she went downstairs and opened the back door, she saw a familiar figure walk quickly away, get into a car that looked like the Morrisons, and drive off into the night. Mary Werbelow, his girlfriend during his college years, was perhaps his most significant early love. They met in Clearwater, Florida, and for a time, she was his muse. It's believed many of his earliest poems, including early versions of Moonlight Drive, were written for her. In a 2005 interview with Robert Farley, Mary described how she met Jim. Mary and her best friend Mary Wilkin spread their beach blanket near Pier 60. Mary was 17 and wearing a black one-piece with a cut all the way down the back, rather daring for the time, especially for a Catholic girl. Jim was living with his grandparents. Mary noticed a guy with a mop of hair who stood out. While sitting on her beach towel, Mary turned to her friend and said the first sexual comment of her life. "Wow, look at those legs." Soon after, they began dating. Friends of Mary's couldn't figure out why she would want to hang out with the likes of Jim Morrison. According to Mary, this wasn't puppy love. This was different. This was intense. She says they connected on a level where speaking was unnecessary. They'd look at each other and know what the other was thinking. Jim eventually transferred to Florida State. Most weekends, rain or shine, he hitchhiked back to Clearwater to see Mary. This was 230 miles one way. Letters from Jim arrived at Mary's house regularly as well. Mary liked her alone time in her bedroom, dancing and drawing. Jim also liked his alone time in his bedroom, reading. The interview Mary did also gives us an insight into how much Jim would read and write. He always had a notebook in his back pocket, and any time and any place, he would fish one out and scribble in it and chuckle. Around Jim, people always felt watched. He'd bait and goad people just to get a rise. He'd take notes. It seemed his purpose in life was observation. Even in the car, if Jim was driving, Mary kept the notebook at the ready. "Write this," Jim would say, or he'd pull over and scribble in the notebook himself. People would rag Jim on all the books he had crowding his living space. Jim would challenge them to pick any book, read the beginning of any chapter. He'd then name the book, the author, and more context than anyone cared to hear. Mary says he was a genius. With Jim having an IQ of 149, she wasn't lying. After a fight between Mary and Jim, he went off with another woman. When he wasn't home the next morning, Mary went to the woman's house. She said Jim wasn't there. Mary didn't believe it and called out, "Come out, wherever you are." Jim came forward wearing only a hand towel around him. Mary bolted and hit the woman's fence as she sped off. According to Mary, that was the beginning of the end for them. Mary says he was drinking hard and taking psychedelic drugs. The darkness she had always seen seemed to be overtaking him, and she didn't want to watch him explore his self-destructive bent. She enrolled in art school. Jim helped her move to a new apartment. She told him she needed a break. He clammed up after that. They split in the summer of 1965. According to Ray Manzarek, the song "The End" was a short goodbye song to Mary. Even though he took up with other women, Mary says Jim would reach out when he needed to talk to someone. Before a photo shoot for the Soft Parade, Mary claims Jim told her the first 3 albums were about her. Mary doesn't think early songs were about her, but says the lyrics include references to her and Jim's shared experiences. For example, the blue bus in the end. She considered writing about the references, but decided against it. She didn't want to spoil people's various interpretations. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe so you don't miss part 2.